Welcome back to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Maldonado, and we have an author with us, the author of Like a Spark from Fire.
My new book.
Yeah, if you haven't read it, pick it up. It's a great read.
It's Like a Spark from Fire, break free from the past, shine your brilliance, and become your true self, with a foreword by Dr. Robert Maldonado. And it's a book written for women, but I'm sure if you're a man, you find it very fascinating.
Yeah, I found it incredibly interesting, mainly because it's really an important part of Jung's theory that evolved kind of through his relationships with women, and then how women also helped him develop the concept of the anima and the animus, and what's called the syzygy, the interaction of the anima and the animus. So we thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation about some of these themes in the book. And of course, we have you, so we can pick your brain on what you were thinking about when you were writing these things. And the creative process itself is interesting. So let's begin with the 4 feminine archetypes, because that's the heart of the book, right? You do talk about kind of the non-dual philosophy.
The Eastern philosophy, yes.
Which is where the title comes from.
Yes. So where do you want to start? Initially, we will do some other episodes on the Eastern philosophy aspect of it. The name Like a Spark from Fire I read in a book translated from the teachings of Adi Shankara, which is one of the early, probably around the time of Buddha. He was a young monk, and he taught non-dualism.
I think he was a lot later than the Buddha, but definitely an early...
right around the time when Buddhism first started coming through India. And Vedanta was the older religion, and he was like, hey, like he wanted to refresh Vedanta and revitalize it in a way. So he was like but it was like 300. They don't know exactly when he lived, but it was about 300 AD, so thousands of years ago. And he would have people come to his temple all the time and ask him questions. And one question someone asked is like, who is the true self? And he said, the true self is like a spark from fire. The soul is like a spark from fire. The fire is the divine, and the soul is identical to the fire, just like the spark is actually made of the same substance because it comes from the fire. But if you can't really separate it, they're exactly the same except with name and form. And he said, just like us, our soul is really connected to the self, which is the universal collective self, that oneness that we talk about, and that within our soul, within each of us, we have the power of the universe. And I just thought it was a really interesting take on personal development, and for people to feel empowered and get out of that fixing mode and realizing that deep within them is pure potential. And that's what the book is about. Another reason I wrote the book is because I love Jung. You introduced me to Jung longer than a couple years ago.
A decade ago.
Yeah, and a lot of Jungian books are written by academics, and I found that we really had a hard time with our students trying to give them books that really speak in a practical way on how to apply these high-end theoretical ideas from Jung. And I thought, well, the better than me, than a layperson to interpret a way to look at the shadow, look at the persona, and look at that individuation process in the beginning and make it accessible to everyone. So that's my little background. And so in the book, I call it the 4 persona types, because we're really first working on that conscious level, the persona level.
Got it. Yeah, so let's talk about Toni Wolff, because she played a big role in helping Jung develop his early theories on feeling, thinking, sensation, and intuition.
Intuiting.
Intuiting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because of the inks. So it's like the four personality types.
Yes. And then, of course, she went on to become an analyst herself and a scholar, and kind of formulated these feminine archetypes as well in one of her books.
Yes. The four feminine archetypes.
Okay. Now, hers were a little bit different than your conceptualization.
Yes, and she even said the names don't matter, but this is hers were the mother, the hetera, which is what I call the lover, or is commonly called the lover type now. The medial type, which is the medium between spirit and matter. And I call that the mystic, just to make it easier. Medial sounds so, I don't know, different. And then Amazon was her and I call it the professional type, because I think a lot of modern women are warriors in the world. They're out there, basically being, taking on that masculine role of like taking action in the world and being active force, conquering the corporate ladder and conquering success. And I see that as women were the modern warriors, and that would match. But I didn't feel like Amazon has such a negative connotation, that we're all these big giant people, but it's really that kind of powerful, independent woman. And so I call that the professional. So mine are the mother, the lover, the professional, and the mystic.
Got it. And so Toni Wolff, an interesting relationship with Jung, and we love Jung, of course, and his theories, but we're not about hero worship. We know he wasn't a saint. He wasn't a perfect fellow.
Controversial.
He had a lot of marital problems, maybe,
affairs,
or, irregularities, maybe. When we visited his home in Zurich, we got the sense that he's still controversial. He still hasn't been fully accepted as one of the famous sons of the city.
And if you think about it, like if he lived now, it would be so much different. But in the Victorian times, was very conservative. Women's roles were very limited. And that's actually a good point, because that's why Toni Wolff came up with her types, because she said women typically just fall into these patterns. They're either the mother and they stay home with their kids, they're the lover of the other woman, which she was, or they're the professional who don't take on a husband, don't take on children, and they're just very professional. Or they're the mystic. They're kind of like outside of society. They're still not taking on children and their typical societal roles. And they're kind of the wise woman that lives at the end of the corner or out in the village that you go visit. She has a mystical, non-integrated part of society. And so she said that's kind of the roles women were defaulted to play. And I think that when we think about Jung's time, that would be very controversial. Is how can you have a wife and a lover, and that both are happy about it? Usually, no one knows. Well, I don't know if they were all both totally happy about it, but it was just a unique situation for them.
Yeah. So let's recount the story, because people might not know the backstories of Toni Wolff. So Toni Wolff came to Jung early in his career. Jung was still working with Freud, or associated with Freud. At that time. And he, in one of his letters to Freud, actually mentions Toni Wolff as a great find, that he really admired this young woman for her intellect. She was brilliant and really had a good feel for religion and dreams, I think, or something like that, that he wrote to Freud, his mentor at that time, kind of expounding her virtues. Toni had come for analysis with Jung. She was young. She was in maybe 19, 20, 21, somewhere around there. Her father had passed away, and so she sought analysis. And then they kind of went their own ways after the analysis. And sometimes analysis at that time would last a year, maybe sometimes more. But it was relatively brief for that period of time. Then he reports that he had a dream about her, and that the dream was indicating that he should contact her and invite her to be an analyst perhaps, or part of his work, part of his life. He said he was looking for an Anima type, an Anima woman to kind of project his Anima on. Very similar to what artists call the muse. Someone to serve as a muse for his thinking, his ideas.
And Emma couldn't be that at the time because Emma was raising 5 children. She was not educated. They didn't educate her, even though she had a very abundant lifestyle, very wealthy family. They didn't educate women back then. Usually, she was groomed for marriage, and so I think she didn't go get trained till later on. So he wanted someone who had that training and education too, as well. And then there's also this other idea of the muse being the unattainable, the kind of imaginary woman, not your kind of practical wife outside of that.
Absolutely. And so Emma is Carl Jung's wife at that time.
Yeah.
She was from a wealthy family, very well established in the community. And then here Jung was this up and coming psychologist, doctor, researcher, thinker, philosopher who was revolutionary in a sense because he was bringing these very new and fresh ideas into psychology at a really a time when psychology was just starting out. So for Jung, it was this affair with this young woman who had been his client or patient for a while, who becomes then his collaborator. She starts to train in his method. The
Individuation.
At that time, it was called analytical psychology. It was still called analytical psychology, which is the Jungian type of analysis. And she was for a while considered like the top analyst besides Carl Jung himself in that field, because she really kind of absorbed the work. She worked for at least a decade very closely with Jung. They would spend whole mornings, whole afternoons poring over the manuscripts and developing these theories. And she is given credit for really helping him develop the idea of the anima and the animus, kind of fleshing it out a lot more, and as well as the shadow and individuation. So needless to say, there was some tension. And when we toured the Carl Jung's house, the tour guide kind of gave us a sense of that. She mentioned that Toni was allowed to come into the house, of course, to work with Carl Jung during the morning, and they would spend their most of the day together.
And she lived on the property too. She lived in the side house right there.
She had her own apartment. But she wasn't allowed to come into the family dinners except on Sundays. Right.
Emma drew the line. She was like, okay, you're going to have this. But one of the things that Emma said later on, when she was older and she had done all the training herself too, is she said, thank God for Toni, because she was able to give Carl something I couldn't give him at the time. And she basically saved him. Like she helped him in so many ways. So she ended up becoming grateful for the woman that she was, that Emma said she wasn't, and that Carl needed at the time to build so she was kind of thinking less of her ego, but more of the bigger picture of this work being developed. Yeah. And Emma had come into her own as well after the kids got older. She asked to be educated, so she got herself educated, and then she started doing analysis as well and taught classes at the Jungian Center and saw patients and all those things. So she ended up, moving into that role as well.
Yeah, so we can only imagine in Victorian times these three these three people, right? You got Carl Jung and his two mates, in a sense, or two wives, showing up to public affairs together and lecturing and teaching and doing all these things. They must have kind of stirred up a lot of rumors and a lot of gossip. So even
and then also too, like he looked into a lot of like very controversial subjects when he talked about the outside of the traditional psychology.
Yes, and actually that's where their relationship kind of split, Toni and Carl Jung, because when Carl Jung got interested in alchemy and started studying the ancient manuscripts from Europe and looking into alchemy as a parallel to individuation, Toni Wolff advised them not to go there. She thought at that time that it would derail his career, essentially, that he would be relegated to kind of the nut jobs that are into mysticism. And to some extent, she was right, but...
he still is called the godfather of the New Age movement.
Yes.
Because people think, because he looked into all of that he was very extreme that way.
Yes.
But he was more looking at it from a psychological standpoint. Like, why do people have these images in their mind? Why do they seek, mediums and the spiritual life of a person? Like he said, they're seeing images of God or images of the future and intuition. Like, how does that happen in the human mind?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see why. If you read his alchemical works, they're hard to get into, but if you persist, they're some of his most penetrating and in-depth aspects of his work. Just incredible insight into how symbolism works and how people project their individuation process into ambiguous stimuli. So for him, these alchemists who were working on these mysterious processes of turning base metals into gold were really talking about individuation, the personal development.
And so Toni decided to leave, and they kind of had a little, not split, but they just kind of went their separate ways. And I think that's maybe where Emma came in and started doing more work with him. And so it kind of was meant to be, in a way, like she...
And von Franz.
And Marie von Franz came in after that. Yeah,
took up
and
some of the
so,
slack.
but I love this. Like, it's very, very little has been done. Like, when you think of Jungian, you don't think of these feminine types. I did a lot of research and looking for where this is anywhere else, and it was really hard to find. Yeah. And but I see that she initially got it from the thinking, feeling, sensing, intuiting personality types that he came up with very early on in his career. A lot of people think that's like only the very first part of what he came up with. But if you think about it, the mother is the feeler, the lover's the sensing, the professional or the warrior is the thinker, that logic. And then the intuitive is obviously the mystic. So we think, well, if you know what your predominant type is, it probably, some people look at the Myers-Briggs and there's like 12 different types in there. Like, it's complicated. But if you think about, are you more nurturing? Is like nurturing your go-to? Is a sensation and loving your life and loving food and drink and sex and falling in love, like very emotional? Is that your like kind of what you lead with? Or you lead with that pragmatism, that logic, that got to get things done checklists? Or are you the mystic, that everything's intuitive, everything is just intuitively guided, and it's almost like you don't even want to be in the world, you want to just be somewhere else, like want to escape. And so the goal is that as women, we all need to integrate these aspects of ourselves into our life. And when we're in a default personality, we end up pushing the opposite in the shadow.
Yeah. So maybe we should explain a little bit about the persona and its role in kind of the individual's evolution. So the major part of the persona is to kind of give the individual a mask to wear, a role to play in society. So these types, they're essentially
They're masks.
Personas, right? They're masks that a woman wears and kind of plays out in society, so that she has a role to play in society.
And you could see even clothing that people choose. Like if you picture a mother, like what would a mother wear? What would the lover wear? What would the mystic wear? Like she would wear like a necklace like this and maybe have, just flowier clothes and maybe yoga pants. And then the lover's like a little sexier and the professional with the suit. And so we all have this kind of archetype that we, I guess that it's the persona that we put out. Yeah. That defines us. And when we think of persona, it's the psychological clothing. So a lot of times our physical clothing represents a part of our mask as well.
Right. But the aim is to transcend this, right?
Yes. So there's a default. And when in the book, we're going to talk about this in future episodes, but the influence of the mother highly, highly influences the daughter in the type she chooses unconsciously. Like it's like an instinctual choice. I want to be just like my mom, or I want to be the opposite, or whoever had what has power. That's what the child would choose. Some daughters want to be like their father. He's the businessman. I want to win daddy's approval, and I want to be like him. And so we choose these roles based on that. And then as we go through life, I have a test that people can take to see, just different how you act in your personality of which type you default to. But we're all kind of a little bit of both, but we lead with one. And that is really not who we are, but our conditioned way. From early in life, observing our mother, saying, she's like our first image of a woman. And we say, do I want to be like her? Or do I want to be like my dad's girlfriend or my stepmom? Or, or there could be a lot of influences in that early childhood's life as she sees women. Yeah. And then she makes her unconsciously, this isn't something that happens consciously, but we learn to adapt and find something that fits in for us.
So before we go into each one, the goal then is to integrate all four of these, or is it to, let's say, define which one fits your particular persona and what the goal of that particular archetype is?
So very first step is to find out your default and look at the shadow aspect of that part. And usually the opposite of the mother could be the lover. So you're integrating that as well, just by the qualities. And then ultimately we do want to, over time, bring in all of them into our life, have a mystical part of ourselves, but not from a persona standpoint, but knowing that unconsciously these archetypes are running through us. And how do we be fully whole within ourselves, where we're being mystical, not because we need to defend ourselves or be mystical to the world. We're doing it because it's who we are on a deep level. We're being the mother and nurturing out of choice. We're having fun out of choice, not to push something away, push commitment away or responsibility away. It's all about really choosing and knowing that each one of us has that capability. A good example would be a mother who has had a couple kids and then she wants to start a business, and there's a conflict between being a professional and being an entrepreneur and starting her business. And so you start with the mother and then you look at the shadow elements, and then that's going to help you integrate that professional role as well, because you'll find that a lot of them are similar, but then there's other parts that are not. And so it's not an exact science. I mean, the psyche is so unique for every single person, but I wrote it in the book because I felt like it gives people a little bit of some structure in this unstructured psyche to kind of step into these ideas of persona shadow that Jung brings. And I thought it would be more accessible to people to say, oh, okay, I'm the mother. I'm the one who pushes away being irresponsible. I'm the one who needs to take care of everyone. I can't be cold and uncaring. And how does that run my life?
Got it. So as an example, you have a little girl growing up, and she idealizes her mother. Mm-hmm. She wants to be like her mother, right? She says, when I grow up, I want to be just like mom. Mm-hmm. So she's identifying with the mother, the way her mother is. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say the mother is a housewife and a stay-at-home housewife and really kind of has bought into that mother role, that that's her purpose, her life.
And she doesn't even question it, that it's a bad, like, it's not something she wants. It's
Right.
really, yeah, that's just what I was born to do.
So the little girl is going to grow up and develop a persona that is the mother, essentially.
Or watching the mother say, that looks like a trap to me. That looks like a lot of responsibility. I see my mother stressed out all the time. She doesn't have any freedom. It just depends on the child. And you'll notice that even in the same family, different daughters, if there's more than one, we have 3 girls in our family, we all kind of took different aspects of our mother, but we also learned to kind of adapt our persona based on what we saw. And so we, you know, for example, a woman, like for me, my mom was one, I love my mother and I wanted to have kids, but there was a part of me that saw that as a trap. Not that my mother ever said that it was, but it's really down to your perspective, your perception, there's something unique in you that's like, does it really fit? And that conflict kept me single for a long time, because I really, on conscious level, I knew I wanted to get married and have kids. And then unconsciously, there was a part of me that thought it was a trap. So it was like almost like my lover was in my shadow a little bit, even though I put it out. I was kind of fun Debbie. There was a conflict between those two personalities, and I wasn't clear on who I was. I really wasn't awake, and so I was reacting to life. And so you can either be rebellious against the mother, or you can be like her, but feel the same traps and frustration. Like a lot of my clients that have had kids, and they love their kids and they love being a mom, but they're like, there's something more, and they feel this conflict of, I want to be a professional now. I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't want to abandon my children. And so that's really where we see the practical way of seeing these types as, oh, the shadow of a mother being a professional is that she doesn't care about her kids. She's, abandoning her children. And so there's not really, but that's the impression or the unconscious assumption that's happening.
And so a person or a woman that identifies with the mother role, you would say, would have problems or a conflict with playing out other aspects of her personality.
Yes, like even the lover, the mother is hyper responsible. So the lover is the carefree woman that can go and have the girls' weekend with the martinis, and kids here. Dad's going to pack your lunches this week, and I'm just going to go on my girls' weekend. There, a woman that has a strong attachment to her mother persona will feel incredible guilt, and it might not even go for that girls' weekend, or not even go to, instead of spending an afternoon at the spa, they'll take that money and make sure she buys the kids' clothes versus, for her. And so it's that conflict of, not out of, it feels rational, but it's not really out of free choice. They're really just they think they're choosing doing the right thing, but they're really just operating on conditioning. This kind of unconscious message that, this by society is who a mother should be, and then who a lover should be. And, those are bad people, or the judgments about those corporate women that are climbing the ladder. They're just cold and heartless, and, not all of them. Of course, I don't believe that, but you think about the cultural assumption of these roles for women is much different. For a man, it's different. For a man, maybe it's different now, but 50 years ago, a man could, when he went out to work and wasn't there for the kids, it was okay. It was just noted. But now, it's like, oh, he should be spending time with his children. And so there's a lot of conflicts with that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a natural question. Do these types correspond to men as well? Do they have their set of the father, or the lover, or the professional, and the mystic?
The only difference is the mother would be exchanged for the father, and I think the father, for men, they're very they're influenced by the mother, but I think they're also influenced by their father because they're a man, so they're going to take on that animus of the man. So the lover role, who would be the what do they call them? The kind of suave guy, like the guy who's always single. I'm trying to think of the word that they use. The romantic guy, but never commits. And then there's the father type that's like very responsible and feels burdened maybe by his responsibility of his family. The worker, is commuting. And then, of course, the mystic. You see men that are gurus and all that. Like a Deepak Chopra would be a mystic.
Now, there's a lot of professional women nowadays, entrepreneurs, executives. Women are really climbing the ladder of the corporations now. So what's the psychology there? What do you see the conflicts for professional women?
First of all, they don't, they're very, well, for all these types, it's very externally focused. The persona is looking externally, like looking for other people to make them feel loved, other people to feel the things out there to feel successful, like material items. The lover is constantly looking for external, sensational pleasures. The man, kind of chasing the man. And then the mystic is also seeing almost like the opposite, rejecting the external and not wanting to integrate. And so the challenge for a lot of people is for the professional would be, she has a hard time wanting to settle down because she is, for the single woman, single professional, she's afraid. She's built so much up, and she's afraid someone's going to mess up her life if she brings in a man and like take away her financing or her financial security. She's very worried about that. Again, attached to the external. Also, maybe not be able to have fun. How can I go out and have fun? No, I have to be responsible. I can't have kids right now because I'm working on my career. How many women fear getting pregnant because they be passed up for the next promotion? And of course, there's laws against that now, but still there's that, I'm going to have to only work part-time if I have a baby and that conflict. And so, the professional needs to integrate bringing in her personal life and making that more of a balance in her life. Because you can make a lot of money, but at the end of the day, you really need to nurture yourself in your human personal life and relationships and friendships and lovers and getting married and all those things. Yeah. And I see a lot of professionals that are married, but they don't. Their partnerships sometimes are an agreement between her and the husband. They're like kind of power couples. But they don't have the love.
They have a contract?
Yeah, it's kind of like a contract. And maybe it didn't start off that way, but then we can get into that. And if that's our default, and we forget the love and romantic part. And for some professional women, I find most of the time, they're conditioned to not feel. And maybe they had a mother who was cold, or maybe their mother was totally emotional and it caused a lot of upset in their life. And so they decided to be the opposite, like, oh, I don't want to look like a chaotic wreck in the world, so I'm going to create this persona of professional that works in the corporate world, so they don't know how to like get in touch with their feelings many times as well.
And the mystic, I imagine somebody like a new age person who is into...
They reject money. They reject a lot of times. There's always the ones that don't, but a lot of times they feel that money's evil, or that to take things from people, take money from people is a terrible thing. And they take vows of poverty, not only in the New Age, but any kind of woman, like a Christian woman, does that too. The kind of the idea of the nun and the monk and you don't have that material desire because you just desire God. One of the other things I noticed with the mystics is that they can be very judgmental about the world and like the right and wrong, and they're very attached to being good. And that could be really terrible, because if they mess up, they're the hardest on themselves. They hurt someone's feelings. They're like, oh, like I'm creating bad karma, and that kind of like an inability to integrate the human part of their life. That we have an ego, we have conditioning. We're not always going to be perfect, and to understand, even though you're in touch with that spiritual part of yourself, that you can also be a mess sometimes in relationships, and it's okay. It doesn't make you less spiritual. So I think there's a lot to each type, and finding balance in your life. that what are you pushing away? And what we talk about in the book is the shadow, is that the things that we reject about aspects of personality that we don't accept about ourselves or don't allow ourselves to express. So to express abundance and express being a wreck, emotionally, because I'm the mystic and I have all the answers and I need to be calm and I need to be wise and I can't be the frantic person, right?
So the idea is to become aware that you are playing these roles, your particular role or your particular type, and then to find a balance in some of the other roles. Let's say to bring in, if you're the mother, to bring in maybe perhaps a little bit of the lover or the mystic or the professional, to balance that role out, but also to integrate the shadow, meaning the aspects that you pushed into your unconscious that didn't necessarily fit your conception of a mother, what is a good mother.
And I say what emerges out of that is the true personality. So we have this true personality, which is not defined by these labels, which that's why I hesitate to have a personality test, because we don't want to be defined by them, but it's really showing us our conditioning. But the true personality is like our true self. It's the ability to, whether your default is mother or not, like say the default is mother and the shadow is being the irresponsible, uncaring person, that you make a decision outside of those judgments, those social judgments of, I really want to drop my kids off at my mother's and I want to go to the spa this weekend with my friends and not feel the guilt, and to be able to make that choice versus being triggered by emotions and feeling that you don't have a choice, because a lot of people feel trapped. They feel the world is giving them some kind of limitation. But when you realize it's just your mind and these kind of rules of society and social personas that we put up that are actually holding us back from making that free choice. And when we make that free choice, that's where the true personality comes in, where you're not irresponsible and you're not responsible. You're not the mother, you're not the lover, you're just being you. Like this other you starts to emerge. That's your spark, your true soul that is unlimited, that isn't, that unlabeled, I should say.
Yeah.
And that's the ego, hangs on to those labels to function in society, but we don't need it anymore. We can transcend that. And that's what individuation, as Jung would say, is all about, is about making a choice.
So it's not about just rejecting these traditional roles.
It's honoring that. Like I was raised by my mom and she's the most loving person. And as you know, you probably appreciate my nurturing ways, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not a bad thing. It's just that if that's your go-to all the time and you feel like you can't be anything else, then that's a trap, because in each one, there's a limitation. If you're a professional, there's a limitation. If you're a mystic, there's a limitation. And even a lover is a limitation, because you never can commit to anything. So you never have that long-term relationship. You never have lasting pleasure. It's always that quick fix, that pleasure chasing all the time and dissatisfaction. So, they're all beautiful. And some people tell me I'm not a mother, but a lot of people say it's the most wonderful job in the world. So why would you not want to have that experience? So it's not making any of these wrong, better, worse. It's about saying, okay, that's my default. There's more though. There's more to me than just this persona.
Yeah. I know one of the great things about your writing is that you reveal yourself. You talk about your own experiences and the process. So I can imagine some listeners are asking, well, how do you do this? How do you identify your type? How do you integrate it? How do you work with it?
You get the book, and there's exercises in there. Truly, there are like step-by-step exercises. But overall, you take the test. Personatypetest.com. You can go there and get your test. You work with a coach. Do the book first. If it feels like for you, we have coaches that are in our coaching training program is a great way to go through it if you're interested in getting trained in this type of method. But the first step is to identify your type and just ask yourself, how is this limiting to me? What are things that I can't do or won't do because I'm attached to being this? And then what you're going to experience is emotions that trigger you around your type. So when someone calls you irresponsible, or when you feel like you can't get everything done, or your child is mad at you because you weren't there for them, you pick them up 5 minutes late and they're crying, you're going to be triggered because I'm a bad mother, or I'm not doing enough, or the child's struggling in school. You just get, this is why you're triggered, because you're so attached to keeping up this persona. And so that would be, I have in the book also exercises how to work with the emotion, how to deal with triggers. And then I think the main thing is non-attachment to everything showing up according to your type. And you have to know your type first to know what you get hooked into. The mother's attached to being responsible. The lover's attached to having fun and freedom. She doesn't like to be like structured or trapped. The professional's attached to success and like that social standing. And then the mystic is attached to being good. And so being good and godlike, or spirit-like. And that attachment in itself, it sounds like, oh, those are good things, But when we're attached to them, it causes us unhappiness.
Yeah, I like that. So understanding your type is not about just identifying yourself as this type and that's the end point.
And I'm a mother, and that's just the way I am.
It's more about understanding, okay, then what are my challenges in moving forward, in finding that balance and integration in your own personal development. So knowing your type can help you understand what you will face and what you will have to work at.
You'll probably have a lot of, once you find your type and you read the descriptions, you'll say, oh, that's why I get triggered around this, or that's why I feel so guilty or shame around this area of my life. And it'll start to make sense to you. And what you want to do is first get insight, because you need insight to do anything. But insight is not transformation. You have to start with insight, but the transformation happens when you work with the emotions and you actually invite these other aspects of yourself in, these hidden aspects of unlived aspects of yourself that you've pushed away, and bring her out to be whole as a whole woman, as an empowered woman in the world. And I think the more we can be ourselves and express our true personality, the more permission other people have to be themselves too, and we're less judgmental of others as well.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, next time we should talk more about Adi Shankara, which you mentioned, because it sounds fascinating. This whole idea of non-dualism, which is a not well-known philosophy, but certainly up and coming as people start to question more what is the nature of consciousness. So we'll
deep
talk
conversation
about that.
Coming up. Yeah.
Yes. Meanwhile, leave us a review, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.
Yes. And go to likeaspark.com and find out more about my book. Get a copy today. It's available anywhere. And I also have an audio version. So with my hypnotic voice, if you want to listen to relaxing voice, you'll like it. So take care, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we'll see you next week
On Soul Sessions.
Bye-bye.